I heard the unmistakable sound of Italian leather shoes clicking against the antique hardwood floors of Grandma Eleanor's Victorian home. I didn't need to turn around to know who had entered the library. Only one person would wear Ferragamos, to stride through a house still draped in mourning. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed. Because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. My cousin Valerie had arrived, and her timing was as calculated as her smile was false. Still buried in those dusty old books, I see. Valerie's voice dripped with artificial sweetness as she surveyed the library where I'd spent countless hours with Grandma Eleanor. Some things never change, do they, Rebecca? I continued cataloging. My grandmother's first edition collection, carefully noting each volume in the leather-bound registry she'd kept meticulously updated for decades. The familiar smell of aged paper and leather bindings had always been a comfort. But today, it felt like the last fragile connection to the woman who'd raised me after my parents died. "Hello, Valerie," I finally replied, turning to face my cousin. The funeral was yesterday. Most people would consider it too soon for a social call. Valerie's crimson lips curved into what might pass for a smile if you didn't know better. Her designer outfit, black but somehow still ostentatious, seemed more appropriate for a fashion show than a mourning period. Her diamond earrings caught, the afternoon light filtering through the library's stained glass windows, sending tiny rainbows dancing across the bookshelves. "Oh, this isn't social, darling. You know why I'm here." She moved closer, her shadow falling across the antique desk where I sat. "The reading of the will is tomorrow, and Noah and I think it's best if we discuss things civilly beforehand." I carefully closed my grandmother's registry, wiping my ink-stained fingers on a cloth. "There's nothing to discuss, Valerie. This is Grandma Eleanor's house, her estate." "Her estate," Valerie corrected, emphasizing the word as she ran her manicured fingers along the edge of a priceless 18th-century globe. "And since Noah has managed her financial portfolio for the past decade, we believe we're entitled to our fair share. The house alone is worth over $1 million in today's market." The antique letter opener in my hand suddenly felt heavier, its silver handle warming against my palm. Noah, my older cousin and Valerie's husband, had indeed been Grandma's financial advisor, the same Noah who had nearly bankrupted her with a series of guaranteed investments before I discovered the discrepancies 3 years ago. The same Noah who almost lost half her savings on cryptocurrency schemes? I asked, keeping my voice steady. "That Noah?" Valerie waved her hand dismissively, her diamond tennis bracelet catching the light. "Ancient history. Eleanor forgave him. They had lunch every month at the country club, until—" She paused dramatically, as if my grandmother's death had been orchestrated for maximum inconvenience. My grandmother's passing was still raw, a wound that hadn't even begun to heal. She'd been gone just 18 days, and here was Valerie, circling, what she thought was easy prey. My fingers tightened around the letter opener before I consciously relaxed them. "Grandma wouldn't have left Noah anything," I said firmly, standing to my full height, which still left me several inches shorter than Valerie in her designer heels. She was many things, but she wasn't naive. Valerie's artificial smile faltered momentarily. "We'll see about that. Your brother Thomas seems to think differently." The mention of my brother sent an uncomfortable chill down my spine. We hadn't spoken properly since Grandma's funeral, where he'd spent more time consoling Noah than supporting his own sister. "You've spoken to Thomas?" "Oh, honey." Valerie stepped closer, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper that reeked of expensive perfume. "We've done more than speak. He's been very helpful." I set the letter opener down carefully, remembering Grandma's words from years ago. "Knowledge is a powerful weapon, Rebecca, but never a cruel one. Even the sharpest words should be wielded with precision, not malice." "Get out of this house, Valerie," I said quietly. "Before I forget." "I manners," she laughed, the sound like crystal shattering on marble floors. Your house? That's adorable. This property is worth $1. $2 million, Rebecca. Did you really think you'd get to keep it all to yourself? Playing librarian in your grandmother's mansion while the rest of us get nothing? My grandmother restored this house room by room, I said, my voice steady despite the anger building inside me. She cataloged every book, preserved every historical detail, maintained every inch of woodwork and plaster. This isn't about money. This is about legacy. Legacy? Valerie snorted, adjusting her designer watch. Wake up, Rebecca. Everything is about money. And tomorrow, when that will is read, you're going to learn that the hard way. She turned to leave, but paused at the library doorway. Oh, and you might want to start packing up these books. Noah and I will need at least a month to renovate before we list the property with our realtor. As her heels clicked down the hallway, I looked down at the registry where my trembling hands had smudged the fresh ink. Grandma had always said, books were windows to other worlds, but at that moment, all I could see were the pages of my life being rewritten without my consent. I pulled out my phone and dialed the one person I knew would understand. Melanie? It's me. Valerie just paid me a visit. I sighed, sinking back into the leather chair. Yes, she's exactly as awful as we thought. Can you come over? There's something about the will I need to discuss with you. My best friend's voice was firm and reassuring on the other end of the line. I'll be there in 30 minutes. Don't worry, Rebecca. Your grandmother was more strategic than they know. As I ended the call, I noticed a small envelope that had fallen from between the pages of the registry. The handwriting on it was unmistakably my grandmother's elegant script, and it was addressed simply to Rebecca, when the vultures circle. I picked it up with shaking hands, wondering how long it had been waiting there, hidden among the books she'd loved so dearly. The envelope felt heavy, like it carried more than just paper. Well, Grandma, I whispered, turning the envelope over in my hands. Looks like you left me one last story to read. The sound of Valerie's car engine faded into the distance as I stood in the library, holding what felt like the first piece of a puzzle my grandmother had left behind. Whatever game Valerie and Noah were playing, I had a feeling they were about to learn they'd chosen the wrong opponent. The old Victorian house creaked and settled around me, almost as if it were agreeing. For as long as I could remember, this house had been my safe haven. First as a frightened 8-year-old orphan, then as a bookish teenager who preferred the company of classic literature to high school parties, and now as a 32-year-old librarian who had returned to care for her aging grandmother. I ran my fingers along the spines of the books nearest to me, first editions of Austen, Dickens, and Bronte that Grandma had collected over her lifetime. Each one had a story beyond the words printed on its pages, where she'd found it, what she'd sacrificed to acquire it, who had owned it before. She'd taught me that objects carried histories just as people did, and that preserving those histories was a sacred trust. The thought of Valerie and Noah selling off these treasures piece by piece made my chest tighten. The collection was worth a small fortune, but its true value couldn't be calculated in dollars and cents. Each book represented a piece of my grandmother's soul. Outside the bay windows, the gardens that surrounded the house were beginning to bloom with the first flowers of spring. Grandma had planted those gardens with the same care she'd shown her books, each plant chosen for its historical significance or literary connection. Roses for Shakespeare, lavender for Austen, foxglove for the Brontes. Another legacy Valerie wouldn't understand or appreciate. I looked down at the envelope in my hands again. The paper was thick, expensive stationery that Grandma reserved for her most important correspondence. I traced my thumb over my name in her handwriting, taking comfort in the familiar curves and flourishes. Whatever message she'd left me, whatever game was afoot, I knew one thing for certain. Eleanor Montgomery hadn't raised me to surrender without a fight. And if there was one thing my grandmother had taught me through all those books, it was that Every good story had unexpected twists, especially when readers thought they knew how it would end. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Melanie arrived precisely when she promised, her sensible sedan pulling into the curved driveway as the afternoon light began to soften. Through the library window, I watched her emerge with her leather briefcase in one hand and a bottle of my favorite red wine in the other. Typical Melanie, always prepared for both business and emotional support. "I figured we might need this," she said, holding up the wine as she strode into the library. The familiar scent of her sandalwood perfume mixed with the aroma of old books as she set her briefcase down with a decisive thunk. I was still holding the unopened envelope, perched on the edge of Grandma Eleanor's reading chair. The room smelled of lemon polish and aged paper, a scent I wasn't ready to lose to Valerie's promised renovations. "You haven't opened it yet?" Melanie nodded at the envelope, already moving toward the antique bar cart to locate wine glasses. "I wanted to wait for you," I admitted, turning the envelope over again. After what Valerie had said about Thomas helping them, I needed an ally present. Melanie handed me a generously poured glass of Merlot. "Open it, Rebecca. Your grandmother was very specific about certain things being revealed at certain times." My head snapped up. "What do you mean?" She settled into the leather armchair opposite mine, her expression both professional and compassionate. "Open the letter, Rebecca." With trembling fingers, I broke the wax seal. Grandma Eleanor had always appreciated these old-world touches. Inside was a single sheet of her personal stationery and a small brass key that glinted in the late afternoon light. "Dear Rebecca," I read aloud, my grandmother's voice seeming to echo in my head. "If you're reading this, then someone has already made a move on the estate. Knowing human nature as I do, I'm guessing it's Valerie. She always did remind me of those characters in Victorian novels who smile while plotting inheritance schemes, all teeth and no heart." Melanie snorted into her wine glass, and I couldn't help but smile. Grandma's literary references had always been spot on. "The key enclosed opens the false bottom of the third drawer in my writing desk," I continued reading. "Inside, you'll find everything you need to protect what's yours. Remember what I taught you about chess. Sometimes you must sacrifice a pawn to protect the queen. Love, Grandma Eleanor." I looked up at Melanie, who was already moving toward the mahogany writing desk that had sat in the library's bay window for as long as I could remember. "You knew about this?" The question came out sharper than I intended. "I helped her set it up," Melanie admitted, gesturing for me to use the key. "Your grandmother came to me 6 months ago, right after her diagnosis. She knew exactly how things would play out." A strange feeling settled in my stomach, part grief, part astonishment. Even in her final months, weakened by illness, Grandma Eleanor had been 3 steps ahead of everyone. The drawer opened with a soft click. I removed the false bottom, revealing a thick manila envelope and a USB drive nestled in the hidden compartment. "Before you look at those," Melanie said, settling on the edge of the desk, "there's something you need to know about tomorrow's will reading. Your grandmother added a codicil 4 days before she died." "A what?" "A modification to the will." Melanie's expression was impossible to read. "And trust me, it's going to change everything." I spread the contents of the manila envelope across the antique desk. Photographs spilled out, dozens of them. Valerie meeting with someone in a dimly lit restaurant. Noah entering the office of a lawyer who wasn't Melanie. Bank statements, email printouts, text message screenshots. "Grandma had them investigated?" I asked, stunned by the thoroughness of the documentation. "Better." Melanie's smile was sharp as a paper cut. "She had them followed. That USB drive contains audio recordings of Noah attempting to access your grandmother's investment accounts without authorization 2 weeks before she died." My hands shook as I picked up one of the photos. "Is that Thomas meeting with Valerie and Noah at the country club?" 3 weeks before your grandmother's death, Melanie confirmed. But look at his face in the next photo. The second image showed my brother leaving the meeting, his expression a mask of barely controlled disgust. He was holding what looked like a check in his hand. He kept that check as evidence, Melanie explained. Brought it straight to your grandmother. That's when Eleanor knew she had to act quickly. My head was spinning. But Valerie said Thomas was helping them. Your brother has been playing a dangerous game, Rebecca, feeding them just enough information to keep them confident while helping your grandmother gather evidence of their conspiracy. I sank back into Grandma's reading chair, trying to process this revelation. Why didn't he tell me? Because Valerie needed to show her hand first. Melanie pulled out some legal documents from her briefcase. Tomorrow, when I read the will, Valerie and Noah are going to think they've won. The initial reading will grant them a significant portion of the estate. What? I stood up so fast my wine glass tipped over, staining a first edition copy of Great Expectations that lay open on the side table. Let me finish. Melanie held up her hand, unfazed by my outburst. That's when the codicil kicks in. Your grandmother set up a trap, Rebecca. The moment they accept the inheritance, they trigger a clause that reveals their attempted manipulation and financial fraud. Everything, the photos, the recordings, the unauthorized access attempts, becomes part of the legal record. Understanding dawned slowly as I stared at the evidence spread across the desk. She made them think they won so they'd incriminate themselves. Exactly. Melanie's grin was triumphant. The real will leaves everything to you, with a modest trust set up for Thomas. Valerie and Noah get nothing except a very public exposure of their true characters. I picked up Grandma's letter again, running my fingers over her familiar handwriting. Even from beyond the grave, she was protecting me, teaching me, helping me stand my ground. One more thing, Melanie said softly. Thomas asked to see you tonight. He has something else you need to know before tomorrow. I looked out the library window at the setting sun, thinking of my brother, of Valerie's smug face, of all the pieces my grandmother had carefully put in place. Tell him to come over, I said. It's time we had a family reunion. As Melanie stepped out to make the call, I turned my attention back to the evidence. The photographs told a story of meticulous planning on both sides. Valerie and Noah's attempts to manipulate my grandmother's finances, and Eleanor's careful documentation of their every move. One photo in particular caught my attention. Noah sitting at Grandma's desk, this very desk, rifling through papers while she was supposedly at a doctor's appointment. The timestamp showed it was taken just 5 weeks ago. The betrayal felt fresh all over again. I remembered how Noah had joined the family 15 years ago, charming everyone with his financial acumen and easy smile. He'd married Valerie after a whirlwind romance and soon positioned himself as the family's financial guru. For years I'd trusted him too, until the irregularities in Grandma's accounts became too obvious to ignore. When I'd confronted him, 3 years ago with evidence of his risky investments, he'd dismissed me as just a librarian who couldn't possibly understand the complexities of modern portfolio management. Grandma had backed me up then, transferring control of her major assets to a different financial advisor. But she'd maintained a cordial relationship with Noah. Now I understood why. She'd been playing the long game. The USB drive beckoned, and I plugged it into my laptop. The files were meticulously organized: audio recordings, financial documents, and a video file simply labeled, "Watch Me First." I clicked on it, and Grandma Eleanor's face filled the screen. She looked frail, but determined, recording this message in what I recognized as her bedroom upstairs. Based on the light and the outfit she wore, this had been filmed just days before her death. "Rebecca, my dear." Her voice was weaker than I remembered, but her eyes were sharp as ever. "If you're watching this, then Melanie has already shown you the evidence we've gathered. I want you to know that I've been aware of Noah and Valerie's schemes for quite some time. What began as financial opportunism has evolved into something more determined and more dangerous. She paused to catch her breath, and my heart ached seeing her struggle. They believe I'm unaware of their attempts to access my accounts, to redirect my investments, even to have me declared mentally incompetent. What they don't realize is that I've been documenting everything, with Thomas's help and Melanie's legal guidance. She smiled then, that familiar, mischievous smile that had always preceded her most brilliant ideas. Tomorrow they'll walk into a trap of their own making. The will's codicil ensures that. But Rebecca, this isn't just about money or even justice. It's about legacy, about ensuring that what I've built and preserved continues in the hands of someone who understands its true value. Tears welled in my eyes as she continued. You've always been that person, from the moment you came to live with me as a child. You understand that some things are priceless not because of what they're worth, but because of the stories they tell, the history they preserve. That's why I've left you one final clue in the place where we first began our literary adventures, together. Remember the secret reading nook? That's where you'll find the last piece of this puzzle. The video ended, leaving me with tears streaming down my face and a renewed sense of purpose. The secret reading nook, the window seat in the third-floor turret, where Grandma had first read me Jane Eyre after my parents' funeral. I hadn't been up there in years. As the last rays of daylight faded from the library windows, I heard the crunch of tires on the gravel driveway. Thomas had arrived. Thomas arrived after dark, looking nothing like the confident brother who'd stood stoically at Grandma's funeral. His tailored suit was wrinkled, his eyes shadowed with exhaustion, and his normally perfectly trimmed beard showed signs of neglect. He hesitated at the library doorway, clutching a leather portfolio like a shield. You look terrible, I said, breaking the uncomfortable silence. Yeah, well, playing double agent isn't as glamorous as the spy novels make it seem. He attempted a smile that didn't reach his eyes. Can I come in? I gestured to the chair across from me. Melanie had stepped out to make some calls, but the evidence of our earlier discovery still littered Grandma's antique desk. I see you found Grandma's insurance policy, Thomas said, nodding at the photographs. Why didn't you tell me what you were doing? The question came out sharper than I intended. He slumped into the chair, looking older than his 35 years. Because I needed to make it right, Becca. After everything with Noah, the way I dismissed your concerns about Grandma's finances, I was an idiot. You were my brother, I corrected. You were supposed to be on my side. I know. He opened the portfolio and pulled out a check. This is what Valerie offered me to testify that Grandma wasn't of sound mind when she made her final will. $200,000 to betray my own sister. I stared at the check, then at my brother. But you didn't cash it. No, I took it straight to Grandma. Thomas's voice cracked. You should have seen her face, Becca. Not angry, just disappointed. That's when she told me about her plan. The antique mantel clock ticked loudly in the silence that followed, each second emphasizing the gulf of misunderstanding that had grown between us over the last 3 years. There's more, Thomas continued, pulling out a digital voice recorder. I recorded everything, every meeting, every offer, every threat. He pressed play, and Valerie's voice filled the room. Once the old lady kicks it, we'll contest the will with your testimony about her mental state. With your statement and Noah's long relationship with her finances, we'll get control of everything. Rebecca won't know what hit her. My hands clenched into fists as the recording continued. Thomas fast-forwarded a bit. Wait, there's worse. Noah's voice now. We'll sell the rare books first. They're the most liquid assets. Then the property. The Victorian market is hot right now. Rebecca can go back to her little public library job and her pathetic book club. She never deserved any of this anyway. Turn it off, I whispered. Thomas complied, then pulled out one final document. This is why I came tonight, Becca. Noah and Valerie didn't just want the money. They wanted revenge. Revenge for what? For making Noah look bad when you exposed his investment schemes. For making him lose his position as Grandma's financial advisor. The memory hit me like a physical blow. Standing in this very library 3 years ago, presenting Grandma with the evidence of Noah's mismanagement, watching her face as she realized how close she'd come to financial ruin. Noah was Grandma's advisor for 8 years, Thomas continued. He planned everything, worked his way into the family, positioned himself as the financial expert, even encouraged Valerie to cultivate a relationship with Grandma. This document proves he's been siphoning funds from at least 3 other elderly clients. He's been running a long con, Becca. I snatched the paper, scanning the bank transfers and account numbers. Grandma knew about this? Found out right before her diagnosis. She was building a case against him, but the cancer. Thomas's voice trailed off. That's when she started planning this instead. Said sometimes justice needs to work outside the system. The codicil, I murmured. Yeah, tomorrow's going to be brutal, Becca. They think they've got it all figured out. Valerie's even hired a videographer to document the historic transfer of Grandma's literary collection to their possession. Despite everything, I laughed. She hired a videographer to record her own downfall? Grandma would have appreciated the literary irony. Thomas smiled, a real one this time. Remember that time in high school when those girls were bullying you about always having your nose in a book? And Grandma invited them to a literary salon that turned out to be a master class in intellectual humiliation? I joined him, at the window, looking out at the darkened garden. She quoted Shakespeare at them until they fled. The empty vessel makes the loudest sound, Thomas quoted. I see clearly now, Thomas. I see what Grandma was trying to teach us, even at the end. That sometimes the best victory isn't in confrontation. It's in letting your enemies defeat themselves, I finished. The mantel clock chimed the half hour, reminding us that tomorrow was getting closer with each tick. You should get some rest, Thomas said, gathering his evidence. Tomorrow's going to be one hell of a show. As I watched him leave, I touched the cool glass of the window pane. Grandma had always loved these old windows, with their wavy imperfections that cast strange, beautiful patterns when the light hit them just right. She'd said they were the eyes of the house, witnesses to generations of stories. Tomorrow they would witness justice served exactly as she had planned. After Thomas left, I found myself drawn to the third-floor turret room Grandma had mentioned in her video. The narrow spiral staircase creaked under my feet as I climbed, flashlight in hand. The electricity in this part of the house had always been temperamental, another charming quirk of Victorian architecture that Valerie would have modernized without a second thought. The turret room was exactly as I remembered. Circular, with windows facing in 3 directions and built-in bookshelves covering every available inch of wall space. The window seat where Grandma and I had spent countless hours reading together was draped with the same faded velvet cushions, now dusty with disuse. I ran my hand along the ornately carved wood of the seat, feeling for the secret compartment we'd used to hide our favorite books and special treasures. There, a small indentation that revealed the hidden latch when pressed just right. The panel slid open with a familiar whisper of wood against wood. Inside was another envelope, this one yellowed with age, and a small leather-bound book I didn't recognize. The envelope bore my name in Grandma's handwriting, but the ink had faded, suggesting it had been written long before her recent illness. Inside was a single sheet of paper, the deed to the house, transferred solely into my name. The date on the transfer was from 5 years ago, long before any of the current drama had unfolded. Attached was a brief note. Rebecca, this house has been in our family for 5 generations. I've watched you love every creaking floorboard and fogged window pane since you came to live with me. The true ownership has always been in your heart, but now the legal ownership is yours as well. No matter what happens, no one can take this from you. It is already done. Grandma E. My hands trembled as I picked up the small leather book. It was Grandma's personal journal, the one she'd carried with her everywhere in the last years of her life. I'd never read it, would never have invaded her privacy that way, but she had clearly left it here for me to find. Opening it to where a ribbon marked a page, I found an entry dated just after my confrontation with Noah 3 years ago. Rebecca showed tremendous courage today. Despite Noah's attempts to belittle her concerns, she stood firm in the truth. She reminded me so much of myself at her age, unwilling to be bullied or gaslighted, even by those with more apparent authority. Noah's reaction confirmed all my suspicions. The way his face contorted with rage when challenged by a mere librarian revealed his true character. Valerie, too, showed her hand with that cutting remark about Rebecca being overly dramatic. I've made arrangements with Melanie today to begin the process of securing my assets, not just for my sake, but for Rebecca's future. There are wolves circling, and I must ensure they cannot harm what I love most. Tears welled in my eyes as I continued reading. Entry after entry documented Grandma's growing concerns, her careful observations of Noah and Valerie's behavior, and her determination to protect both her legacy and me. The final entry was dated just a week before her death. The pieces are in place. Melanie has the legal documents prepared. Thomas has gathered the evidence. The trap is set. I only regret that I won't be there to see it spring, but I take comfort knowing that Rebecca will be. She has always understood what matters most, that wealth isn't measured in dollars but in stories, in connections, in the preservation of what is meaningful. Tomorrow I'll record my final message for her. After that, all I can do is trust that the plan will unfold as intended. As Jane Austen wrote, "It isn't what we say or think that defines us, but what we do." I've done all I can. The rest is in Rebecca's hands. I closed the journal, overwhelmed by the depth of Grandma's foresight and love. Even as she faced her own mortality, her primary concern had been protecting me and the legacy we both cherished. The sound of Melanie's car returning drew me back to the present. Tomorrow would bring the confrontation Grandma had so carefully orchestrated. I needed to be ready. As I descended the spiral staircase, journal and deed clutched to my chest, I felt a renewed sense of purpose. Whatever happened at the will reading, I already held the most important pieces of my grandmother's legacy, her wisdom, her courage, and now, I realized, her home. The morning of the will reading dawned bright and clear, sunlight streaming through the stained glass panels that crowned the library windows. I had barely slept, spending most of the night reviewing the evidence Grandma had collected and preparing myself for what was to come. Melanie arrived early, dressed in a crisp charcoal suit that signaled she meant business. She arranged her papers on Grandma's mahogany desk while I watched a small team set up video equipment around the library. "Is everything ready?" I asked quietly as Melanie organized her files. She patted her leather briefcase. "All set. The codicil is sealed in this envelope along with copies of all the evidence. I've also taken the liberty of inviting a court reporter to create an official record of the proceedings." Thomas slipped through the door, looking significantly more put together than he had the previous night. "Valerie and Noah just pulled up," he murmured. "You should see them. Dressed like they're attending a gallery opening rather than a will reading. Valerie's already directing the videographer on the best angles to capture their emotional response to inheriting Grandma's collection. A strange calm had settled over me. After the shock and anger of the previous day, I now felt oddly detached, almost as if I were watching a play unfold rather than experiencing it firsthand. Perhaps this was what Grandma had meant about letting events take their natural course. "Places, everyone," Melanie muttered, straightening her jacket. "The performance is about to begin." Valerie swept in first, wearing a black dress that somehow managed to be both somber and fashionable. Noah followed in a tailored suit, his silver-streaked hair perfectly coiffed. The videographer trailed behind them, adjusting settings and checking light levels. Rebecca. Noah nodded stiffly. It was the first time he'd spoken directly to me since our confrontation 3 years ago. Thomas. His eyes narrowed slightly. At my brother, perhaps sensing something was off. "Shall we begin?" Melanie announced, taking her place behind Grandma's desk. As Eleanor Montgomery's attorney, I'll be reading her last will and testament, along with any additional documents she prepared before her passing. Valerie settled into a chair, crossing her legs elegantly. "We're ready." I noticed she had positioned herself perfectly in frame for the video camera. Thomas caught my eye and gave an almost imperceptible shake of his head. The performance indeed. "Before we begin," Melanie said, "I want to confirm that everyone understands this is an official proceeding. Everything said here today is being recorded and will become part of the legal record." She nodded toward the court reporter who sat unobtrusively in the corner. Valerie's smile faltered slightly. This hadn't been part of her staging. Melanie opened a formal-looking document. "I, Eleanor Victoria Montgomery, being of sound mind and body, do hereby set forth my last will and testament." The initial reading proceeded exactly as Melanie had warned me. Grandma's estate, including the Victorian house, her literary collection, and investment portfolio, valued altogether at approximately $2 million, was to be divided, 55% to me, 45% to be split between Noah and Valerie. "I knew it!" Valerie exclaimed, grabbing Noah's arm. "Eleanor valued our relationship too much to leave us out." I watched Noah's face carefully. Unlike Valerie, who was practically glowing with triumph, he looked wary, his eyes darting between Melanie and the court reporter. "However," Melanie continued, her voice cutting through Valerie's celebration, "there is a codicil to the will, added 4 days before Eleanor's death." Valerie's smile froze. "A what?" "A modification," Noah explained, suddenly looking very alert. "What kind of modification?" Melanie broke the seal on the envelope with deliberate slowness. "The acceptance of any inheritance under this will is contingent upon a full investigation into certain financial irregularities discovered in the months preceding my death." The room went silent. Even the videographer seemed to hold his breath, instinctively sensing the dramatic shift occurring. "What irregularities?" Noah's voice had lost its confident edge. "Perhaps these will explain," Melanie said, sliding the photographs across the desk. "Or this USB drive containing recordings of unauthorized attempts to access Eleanor's accounts. Or these bank statements showing systematic redirection of funds from elderly clients." Noah grabbed one of the photos, his face draining of color. It showed him entering the office of a competing financial advisor, carrying what appeared to be Eleanor's confidential portfolio documents. Thomas spoke up from his corner. Grandma had quite the collection of evidence, including recordings. "Of you both planning to contest the will based on false testimony about her mental state." "Turn that camera off." Valerie stood so quickly her chair toppled backward. "Now!" "Oh no," I said, finally finding my voice. "The camera stays. You wanted to document this historic moment, remember?" "You can't do this," Valerie hissed, turning to Noah. "Tell them they can't do this." But Noah was still staring at the photos, particularly one showing him accessing Grandma's computer while she was at a medical appointment. "The codicil is quite clear," Melanie continued, professional. As ever, any attempt to claim an inheritance automatically triggers the release of all this evidence to the proper authorities, including the Securities and Exchange Commission and the District Attorney's Office. The choice is yours." "Choice?" Valerie laughed, the sound brittle and sharp. "What choice? You've trapped us." No, I corrected her, rising to meet her gaze. You trapped yourselves. Every scheme, every plot, every attempt to steal what wasn't yours, it all led to this moment. Valerie whirled on Thomas. This is your fault. You were supposed to help us. Thomas shrugged, his expression calmer than I'd seen in years. I did help, just not you. Noah finally spoke, his voice hollow. It's over, Valerie. We've lost. The hell it is. She grabbed one of the rare books from a nearby shelf, a first edition Dickens worth thousands. I won't let her win. Melanie quickly pressed a button on her laptop, and Grandma's face appeared on the large monitor we'd set up the night before. The timestamp showed the video had been recorded just 5 days before her death. If you're watching this, Grandma's voice filled the room. It means you've shown your true colors just as I knew you would. Despite her frail appearance, her eyes were sharp and clear. Noah, I trusted you with my financial well-being, and you betrayed that trust. Valerie, you married into this family and immediately began plotting to claim what wasn't yours. Greed is a terrible teacher, but consequences are excellent students. Valerie's mascara ran in black streaks as she set the book down, her hands shaking. She was a manipulative old woman who couldn't stand to see anyone else have nice things. This whole thing is a setup. Ms. Montgomery, the court reporter interrupted. Please control yourself or I'll have to note your outburst in the official record. Note this in your official record, Valerie spat. This isn't over. You think you've won, Rebecca? You think this little trap changes anything? I destroyed better people than you over brunch. Melanie remained calm. Additionally, the codicil specifically states that any threats made during or after the reading of the will shall be considered evidence of intent and will be submitted to the authorities. Along with the financial documentation, Noah stood up, straightening his tie with shaking hands. Valerie, that's enough. We need to consult with our lawyer. Your lawyer is currently being investigated by the Bar Association, Melanie informed them. Eleanor filed a complaint regarding his involvement in the attempt to have her declared mentally incompetent. The room fell silent again, broken only by the sound of the camera's quiet whirring and Valerie's increasingly ragged breathing. As I was saying, Melanie continued, according to the codicil, in light of the evidence presented here, the revised distribution of assets is as follows. The entirety of Eleanor Montgomery's estate, including all property, investments, and collections, passes to Rebecca Montgomery. Thomas Montgomery receives the previously established trust fund of $100,000. Noah took Valerie's arm. We're leaving, now. As they turned to go, Melanie added, the authorities have been notified and would like to speak with you both. They're waiting in the foyer. Valerie's face contorted with rage. You planned this entire ambush. No, I replied quietly. Grandma did. As they were escorted out by 2 plainclothes officers who had been waiting discreetly in the hallway, the videographer continued filming, capturing every moment of their humiliation. Thomas moved to stop him, but I shook my head. Let him finish, I said. Valerie wanted to document this historic transfer of ownership. She should get what she paid for. After they left, the library seemed suddenly larger, as if their toxic presence had been taking up physical space. The court reporter completed her notes, packed up her equipment, and departed with a professional nod. Well, Thomas said into the silence, I guess that videographer caught a very different kind of historic moment than Valerie intended. Melanie was already gathering the evidence to hand over to the authorities. The DA will want statements from both of you, but that can wait until tomorrow. The initial financial fraud charges should be filed by the end of the week. I walked to the window, looking out at the garden where spring flowers were beginning to bloom. It doesn't feel like I expected, I admitted. I thought I'd feel triumphant, I guess. Instead, I just feel sad. Thomas joined me. Sad for them? No. I shook my head. Sad that Grandma had to spend her final months planning all this instead of simply enjoying the time she had left. Sad that people she once trusted betrayed her so completely that she needed to create this elaborate trap. Melanie closed her briefcase with a definitive snap. Don't be. Eleanor told me this project gave her focus and purpose when she needed it most. She said planning it was like constructing the perfect mystery novel, complex, satisfying, and ultimately just. The comparison made me smile. It was so perfectly Grandma. There's one more thing, Melanie added, pulling out a final envelope. Eleanor asked me to give you this after the will reading was complete. She called it her epilogue. Thomas excused himself to speak with the officers who would be taking Noah and Valerie's statements, leaving me alone with the last message from my grandmother. The envelope felt lighter than the others, as if whatever burden Grandma had been carrying had finally been set down. Inside was a single sheet of paper with just a few lines written in Grandma's elegant hand. My dearest Rebecca, now that justice has been served, remember that the best revenge is living well. The house is yours, the books are yours, but more. Importantly, the future is yours. Don't let this experience harden your heart. The library still needs new stories, and life still needs living. I didn't set this trap just for justice. I did it so you could be free. Free from doubt, free from fear, and free to write the next chapter. All my love, Grandma Eleanor. As I folded the letter, I noticed Valerie's abandoned videographer packing up his equipment in the corner. Wait, I called to him. How much did she pay you to document today? He looked uncomfortable. $500, but given what happened, I don't expect to be paid. I reached for my checkbook. I'll double it if you make sure I get a copy of everything you filmed today. He looked surprised but nodded. Deal. Thomas returned, raising an eyebrow at our exchange. What? I shrugged. Grandma always said that every good story deserves proper documentation. For the first time in weeks, perhaps months, Thomas laughed, a genuine sound that seemed to lighten the very air in the library. She certainly would have appreciated that final plot twist. Outside, the media had already begun to gather, tipped off by who knows who about the drama unfolding within the Victorian mansion's walls. But inside, surrounded by the books and memories of my grandmother, I finally felt something I hadn't experienced since before her illness. Peace. The preliminary hearing came faster than any of us expected. 2 weeks after the will reading, I found myself sitting in a wood-paneled courtroom, watching Noah and Valerie being led in wearing significantly less fashionable attire than they'd sported at Grandma's house. Valerie had managed to post bail, but Noah, facing more serious financial fraud charges, had not. Melanie sat beside me, a comforting presence in the unfamiliar environment. She'd insisted on representing me personally, saying some moments required both legal expertise and friendship. Thomas sat on my other side, our relationship stronger now than it had been in years. All rise, the bailiff called out. The Honorable, Judge Diane Winters presiding. The judge, a stern-looking woman with silver hair pulled back in a tight bun, entered and took her seat. Be seated. We're here for the preliminary hearing in the matter of Montgomery Estate and the related charges of financial fraud, attempted elder abuse, and conspiracy. Let's begin. Valerie's eyes locked onto mine as she took her seat at the defense table. The hatred in them was palpable, but something else flickered there too: desperation. Her lawyer had been trying to negotiate a plea deal, but the prosecutor wasn't budging, not with the mountain of evidence Grandma had collected. Your Honor, the prosecutor began, the state would like to enter into evidence Exhibits A through F, documenting a pattern of systematic fraud and conspiracy spanning approximately 3 years. I watched as they displayed the photos, the bank statements, the recordings, the same evidence that had been revealed at the will reading. Valerie's face grew paler with each new piece presented. Noah just stared at his hands, shoulders slumped in defeat. The state calls Rebecca Montgomery to the stand. Walking to the witness box felt like crossing an ocean. I could feel everyone's eyes on me. The journalists scribbling in their notebooks, the jury leaning forward in anticipation, Valerie's gaze burning into my back. Please state your name for the record. Rebecca Montgomery. Ms. Montgomery, can you tell us about your relationship with the defendants? I took a deep breath, looking straight at Valerie. Noah is my cousin's husband. He served as my grandmother's financial advisor for 8 years. Valerie is my cousin. They married 5 years ago. And after their marriage, did you notice any changes in their relationship with your grandmother? Objection. Valerie's lawyer stood. Calls for speculation. I'll rephrase, the prosecutor said smoothly. Ms. Montgomery, can you describe the defendant's interactions with your grandmother that you personally witnessed? I described everything. The increasing frequency of their visits after Grandma's diagnosis, Noah's unauthorized access to her accounts, Valerie's subtle suggestions that Grandma was becoming forgetful, their reaction when I presented evidence of financial mismanagement. 3 years earlier. Ms. Montgomery, the prosecutor held up the documents found in Noah's office. When did you become aware of these plans regarding your grandmother's estate? Objection, Valerie's lawyer shouted. Those documents were obtained without proper authorization. Your Honor, these documents were found in a search conducted with a valid warrant following evidence presented by Eleanor Montgomery herself before her death. The judge peered at Valerie over her reading glasses. Overruled. I learned about them after Grandma's will reading, I answered. My grandmother suspected something like this might happen. That's why she gathered all the evidence and changed her will. She was protecting her legacy even after she was gone. Noah suddenly stood up, his handcuffs rattling. This is absurd. I was her financial advisor for nearly a decade. I made that woman money when the market was crashing. This whole thing is a setup orchestrated by a paranoid old woman who couldn't accept that. Mr. Sullivan, the judge barked, sit down, or I'll have you removed from my courtroom. Valerie grabbed his arm, pulling him back into his seat, but the damage was done. His outburst had revealed more about his character than any evidence could have. Ms. Montgomery, the prosecutor continued once order was restored, can you tell us why your grandmother went to such lengths to document these activities rather than simply reporting them to authorities at the time? I thought about Grandma's video message, about her journal entries, about her final letter to me. My grandmother believed in justice, but she also believed in irrefutable proof. She knew that someone of Noah's professional standing might be able to talk his way out of accusations from an elderly woman, especially if he portrayed her as confused or forgetful. So she built a case that no one could dismiss. The questioning continued for nearly an hour. When I was finally allowed to step down, Melanie squeezed my hand as I returned to my seat. The prosecution calls Thomas Montgomery. My brother's testimony was even more damaging than mine. He described in detail how Valerie and Noah had approached him, offering substantial payment for false testimony about our grandmother's mental state. He played the recordings he'd made of their meetings, each word digging them deeper into legal jeopardy. By the time the morning session ended, Noah's attorney was already signaling to the prosecutor, clearly eager to discuss a deal. During the Achisa lunch recess, Thomas and I sat on a bench outside the courthouse, sharing a sandwich from the deli across the street. I never thought we'd be here, he said quietly. When Grandma first told me what she suspected, I couldn't believe it. Noah always seemed so competent, trustworthy. That was his talent, I replied, making people trust him while he systematically betrayed them. The prosecutor thinks Noah will take a deal, Thomas said. He'll have to give up his financial licenses, pay restitution, and serve at least some time. But by cooperating, he might avoid the maximum sentence. And Valerie? Thomas shrugged. She's facing fewer charges, but her involvement in the conspiracy is clear. She'll probably avoid jail time, but not a felony record. When court resumed, Noah's attorney formally requested time to discuss a plea arrangement. The judge granted a 2-day recess for negotiations. As we left the courthouse, reporters swarmed around us, shouting questions. Melanie expertly guided us through the crowd to her car. No comment except to say that we're cooperating fully with authorities and request privacy during this difficult time, she stated firmly, a perfect echo of what she'd prepared after the will reading. Back at the Victorian house, my house now, I was still adjusting to that reality. We gathered in the kitchen rather than the library. Somehow the cozy, less formal space felt right for processing the day's events. The DA just called, Melanie announced, setting down her phone. Noah's talking. He's admitted to everything, including similar schemes with at least 2 other elderly clients. How many people did he defraud? I asked, appalled at the scope of his crimes. They've identified 5 so far, Melanie said, all wealthy older individuals with significant assets and few close family members to monitor their finances. Your grandmother was actually the only one who caught on to what was happening. Because she had Rebecca, Thomas added. The others were more isolated. A thought struck me. Grandma knew, didn't she? That it wasn't just about her money. That's why she documented everything so carefully. Melanie nodded slowly. She showed me a pattern she'd discovered. Financial advisors targeting wealthy seniors, subtle manipulation of accounts, gradual isolation from family members who might notice irregularities. She wasn't just protecting herself or you. She was trying to stop him from doing this to anyone else. I walked to the kitchen window, looking out at the garden Grandma had tended so carefully. The spring flowers were in full bloom now, a riot of colors against the Victorian home's stately backdrop. We should release a statement, Thomas suggested. Control the narrative before Noah's lawyer tries to spin this as some sort of misunderstanding or family disagreement. Already drafted, Melanie said, opening her laptop. A simple acknowledgement of the ongoing legal proceedings, expression of gratitude for the justice system's thoroughness, and a request for privacy. Professional, dignified, everything your grandmother would have wanted. There's something else? Thomas said, pulling an envelope from his jacket. I found this in Grandma's personal files while I was gathering additional evidence for the DA. It's marked, After Justice is Served, the next chapter. With hands steadier than they'd been in weeks, I opened the envelope, recognizing Grandma's handwriting once again. My dearest Rebecca, I read aloud. If you're reading this, then the courts are now handling what needed to be addressed, and you can turn your attention to better things. You've spent so many years helping me preserve the past that I wonder if you've had enough time to consider your own future. I paused, suddenly emotional at her perceptiveness even from beyond the grave. Inside the desk in my bedroom, not the one in the library, but the small writing desk by the window, you'll find a proposal I've been working on. It's for transforming the carriage house into a small rare book conservation studio and literary museum. The preliminary plans are drawn up, the business model outlined, permits researched. All it needs is someone with the knowledge, passion, and vision to bring it to life. Someone like you. Thomas smiled. She never missed a detail, did she? The funds for this project, I continued reading, have been set aside in a separate account, untouched by Noah's machinations. Melanie has all the information. This was always my dream for the property, not just a home or a collection, but a living, breathing monument to the power of literature, open to those who truly appreciate it. Melanie was already pulling out additional documents from her bag. She set up everything, the business entity, the conservation fund, even applications for historical landmark status to ensure tax benefits. All it needs is your signature. I looked from the letter to the documents to the Victorian house around me. Not just a valuable piece of real estate as Valerie and Noah had seen it, but a vessel for stories, for history, for connection to something larger than ourselves. Exactly what Grandma had always believed in. "She's giving you your dream job," Thomas said softly. "The one you talked about in graduate school before you put it aside to care for her." The realization hit me with both joy and a twinge of sorrow that she wouldn't be here to see it come to life. But in a way, she had seen it, had envisioned it so clearly that she'd planned every detail. "There's more," I said, returning to the Kai letter. "Remember what I always told you about great literature, Rebecca, that the most satisfying stories aren't those where evil is defeated, but where good is allowed to flourish afterward. Don't let the Noah and Valerie chapter of our family story define the rest of the book. Write something beautiful instead." As the afternoon light filtered through the kitchen windows, painting golden patterns on the tile floor, I felt a shift inside me. From the defender of my grandmother's legacy to the creator of something new, something that honored her while looking forward rather than back. "So?" Melanie asked, her professional demeanor softening into genuine curiosity. "What happens next in this story?" I looked at the plans Grandma had drawn up, at Thomas's expectant face, at the house that had been in our family for generations. For the first time since before Grandma's illness, I felt a spark of excitement about the future. "Next," I said, feeling stronger than I had in years, "we build something new." 6 months later, the late autumn sunlight streamed through the newly restored stained glass windows of the carriage house, casting jewel-toned patterns across the restoration tables, where I was carefully rebinding a 19th-century copy of Jane Eyre. The Montgomery Literary Conservation Studio had been open for just 2 months, but we already had a waiting list of clients eager to have their precious books restored and preserved. "You've got visitors," Thomas called from the doorway, breaking my concentration. I looked up from my work, carefully setting aside the delicate pages. "The tour isn't scheduled until 2. "Not those kinds of visitors." He stepped aside to reveal Melanie standing with a distinguished-looking man in a tweed jacket. "Rebecca," Melanie said, her professional demeanor barely containing her excitement. "This is Dr. Harrison from the National Literary Preservation Society. He's here about your grant application." My heart skipped a beat. I'd submitted the application 3 months ago, never truly believing we'd catch the attention of such a prestigious organization so quickly. "Ms. Montgomery," Dr. Harrison stepped forward, taking in the restored carriage house with an appreciative eye. "I must say, what you've accomplished here in such a short time is remarkable. Your grandmother's collection alone would be worthy of our attention, but the work you're doing to make conservation techniques accessible to the public is exactly the kind of initiative our organization seeks to support." I wiped my hands on my apron, conscious of the bookbinding glue that still clung to my fingers. "Thank you, Dr. Harrison. The collection and this space are my grandmother's legacy, but the studio's mission is something we're building together." I gestured toward Thomas and the 2 graduate students who were cataloging books in the corner. Dr. Harrison nodded. "That's precisely why I'm here in person rather than sending an email. The committee was unanimous in its decision. The Montgomery Literary Conservation Studio has been awarded our annual preservation grant, $75,000 to expand your educational programs and conservation work." The news left me momentarily speechless. When I'd drafted the application at Melanie's insistence, I'd seen it more as a practice exercise than a realistic funding opportunity. "We're honored," I finally managed. "This will allow us to offer scholarships for our workshop series and expand our community outreach." "The committee was particularly impressed with your proposal to work with local schools," Dr. Harrison continued. "Introducing young people to book conservation isn't just about preserving old texts. It's about fostering appreciation for literature and history in the next generation." After Dr. Harrison left, having extracted a promise that I would attend the formal grant ceremony in New York the following month, Thomas, Melanie, and I gathered in what had once been the carriage house's tack room, but now served as our small office. "This calls for a celebration," Thomas declared, pulling a bottle of champagne from the small refrigerator we kept stocked for special occasions. As he poured 3 glasses, I took a moment to absorb how much had changed in the past 6 months. The courtroom drama had concluded with Noah accepting a plea deal, 8 years in prison, restitution to his victims, and permanent revocation of his financial licenses. Valerie had received 3 years probation and community service, along with a significant fine. Last I'd heard, she'd moved to Arizona, as far from the scandal and our family as she could get. More importantly, the carriage house transformation that Grandma had envisioned was now a reality. The main floor housed the conservation studio and a small exhibition space where visitors could view special pieces from the Montgomery collection and learn about book preservation techniques. The upper floor, once storage space, had been converted into a classroom where we offered workshops on bookbinding, paper conservation, and literary history. To Eleanor, Melanie raised her glass, who knew exactly what she was doing when she left all this to you. To Grandma, Thomas echoed, and to Rebecca, who turned an inheritance into something even better than the original. I smiled at the compliment, but shook my head. Not better, just different. Grandma knew this place needed to evolve to survive. After our impromptu celebration, Thomas headed back to the main house to prepare for the afternoon tour group, retirees from a local historical society who had booked a combined tour of the Victorian home and conservation studio. Since opening the property for limited public access, we'd discovered a surprising enthusiasm for both literary history and historical architecture. Melanie lingered, clearly having something else on her mind. "Out with it," I said, recognizing her "I have legal news" expression. "The DA called this morning," she said. "They've identified 3 more victims of Noah's schemes. Elderly clients from before he even met your grandmother. One case dates back nearly 15 years. I sank into my chair, the champagne's glow fading slightly. "He's been doing this his entire career." "It seems so, but here's the thing. Because of your grandmother's meticulous documentation, they have enough evidence to add charges. His 8-year plea deal might extend significantly." "She would have been satisfied with that," I said after a moment. "Not happy. Grandma never took pleasure in others' misfortune, even when deserved, but satisfied that he couldn't hurt anyone else." Melanie nodded, then pulled a newspaper from her briefcase. "There's something else you should see." It was the lifestyle section of the regional paper. The headline read, "Historic Montgomery Estate Transformed into Literary Preservation Center," accompanied by a photograph of me demonstrating bookbinding techniques to a group of middle school students. "They're calling it a model of cultural preservation and community education," Melanie said. "Your grandmother would have loved this, not the publicity, but seeing her collection becoming a living resource rather than gathering dust." After Melanie left, I returned to the conservation table and the patiently waiting copy of Jane Eyre. As I carefully aligned the signatures of pages, preparing them for the new binding, I couldn't help but draw parallels between book restoration and what had happened with the estate. A book, like a legacy, could be damaged by neglect or malice. But with the right care, the right intentions, and the right techniques, it could be restored and given new life. Different from its original form, perhaps, showing evidence of its journey and repair, but still carrying the essential story within. The afternoon tour arrived precisely on schedule, Thomas leading a group of enthusiastic seniors through the carriage house doors. "And this," he announced with a flourish, "is where the magic happens. My sister Rebecca is one of only 8 certified literary conservators in the state." I looked up from my work, smiling at the visitors. This was my favorite part of our new venture, sharing not just the techniques of conservation, but the joy of connecting with literature on a physical, tangible level. "What are you working on?" asked an elderly gentleman at the front of the group, peering through thick glasses at the book on my table. A first edition Jane Eyre, I explained, carefully turning the book so they could see the title page. Not particularly rare as first editions go, but this copy has a special history. It belonged to my grandmother, who received it from her grandmother, who purchased it in London in 1874. 5 generations of women passing down a book, marveled one of the visitors. Now that's a legacy. The tour continued through the studio, the visitors asking thoughtful questions about paper conservation, leather binding, and the challenges of preserving digital literature for future generations. As always, I found myself energized by their interest, their understanding that these weren't just old books, but vessels of human thought and experience across time. Later that evening, after the visitors had departed and the studio was quiet, I sat alone in Grandma's library, my library now, though I still couldn't think of it that way. The familiar smell of leather bindings and lemon polish surrounded me as I opened my laptop to compose an email to Dr. Harrison, confirming my attendance at the grant ceremony. A soft knock at the door interrupted my thoughts. Thomas entered, carrying a small package. "This just arrived by courier," he said, placing it on the desk. "Certified mail, signature required. Must be important." The package bore the return address of Grandma's Safety Deposit Box Management Company. Inside was a small leather journal I'd never seen before, and a note from the bank manager explaining that Eleanor Montgomery had arranged for this item to be delivered exactly 6 months after her will was executed. "She's still full of surprises," Thomas murmured as I carefully opened the journal. Unlike Grandma's other journals, with their accounts of daily life and observations, this one contained what appeared to be short letters, each dated on the same day, October 15th, but from different years. They were all addressed to me. She wrote to me on my birthday, I realized, every year since I came to live with her, letters she never sent. Thomas squeezed my shoulder gently. "I'll give you some privacy," he said, slipping quietly from the room. I turned to the first entry, dated 24 years ago. "My dearest Rebecca, today you turn 8. You've been with me for only 2 months since your parents' accident, and I still see such sadness in your eyes. This morning, though, when I showed you the secret reading nook in the turret, you smiled, really smiled, for the first time since you arrived. We read 3 chapters of The Secret Garden, and you asked if we could read more tomorrow. It's a start. Books have always been my refuge. Perhaps they will become yours too. I've decided to write to you each birthday, keeping a record of our journey together. Perhaps someday I'll share these letters with you, or perhaps they'll simply help me remember these precious years. All my love, Grandma Eleanor." Tears blurred my vision as I turned the pages, reading through the annual entries. Grandma had chronicled everything: my awkward teenage years, my college decision, my graduate studies in library science, my decision to return home to care for her during her illness. Each entry was filled with such love, such pride, such absolute certainty in my worth even during times when I doubted myself. The final entry was dated last October, just weeks before her death. "My dearest Rebecca, today you turn 32. I won't be here for your next birthday, a thought that brings me more sadness than I can express. But I've lived long enough to see you become the woman I always knew you could be, intelligent, compassionate, and stronger than you realize. By the time you read this, the difficulties with Noah and Valerie will be resolved one way or another. I hope my plans worked as intended, not just to protect what I've built, but to free you to build something of your own. Remember what we read in that secret turret room so many years ago? If you look the right way, you can see that the whole world is a garden. Your garden is just beginning to bloom, Rebecca. Tend it well, share its beauty, and know that I am profoundly proud of you and the legacy you will create. All my love, always, Grandma Eleanor." I closed the journal, holding, it close to my heart as I gazed around the library. The afternoon light filtered through the stained glass windows, casting patterns across the books that had shaped both our lives. In the 6 months since the will reading, I'd come to understand that Grandma's true legacy wasn't the Victorian house, the valuable first editions, or even the newly established conservation studio. It was the wisdom she'd passed down, the lessons in resilience and integrity, and most of all, the understanding that the most valuable inheritance isn't what can be measured in dollars, but what can be measured in impact. Outside the window, I could see visitors strolling through the garden, pausing to read the small plaques identifying plants mentioned in classic literature, another of our educational initiatives. Beyond them, the carriage house stood with its doors open to the community, just as Grandma had envisioned. "Thank you," I whispered, running my fingers along the spine of the journal. "For everything." The house creaked gently in response, a familiar sound that no longer seemed like settling wood, but like a conversation across time. The past acknowledging the present honoring the past, and both looking toward a future neither could fully envision, but both had helped to create. 1 year later. The ceremony at the National Literary Preservation Society's annual gala in New York had been everything I'd dreaded. Formal attire, networking small talk, and far too many people asking about that fascinating inheritance scandal they'd read about in the papers. But it had also been everything Grandma would have wanted for the Montgomery Literary Conservation Studio: recognition, connections with like-minded institutions, and, most importantly, a platform to advocate for the preservation of literary history. I stood by the hotel window in my rented evening gown, watching the Manhattan lights twinkle below as I slipped off the uncomfortable heels that had been pinching my toes all evening. The award, a beautiful crystal book sculpture, sat on the desk beside my laptop, where I'd been trying to compose an email to Thomas about the evening's success. My phone buzzed with a text from Melanie. "Just saw the Society's social media post. Congratulations. Call me tomorrow with details. P.S. The DA has updates on Noah's case." That last line sent a small ripple of tension through my shoulders. It had been months since I'd actively thought about Noah and Valerie and their schemes. The studio had become so busy, the programming so successful, that the past year's drama had receded like a tide, leaving behind only occasional debris to remind me of the storm. I texted back a quick thanks and promised to call, then returned to the window. New York was beautiful at night, but I found myself missing the creaking floors of the Victorian house, the smell of old books, and the quiet rhythm of small-town life that had become so precious to me over the past year. Tomorrow I'd fly home, back to the world Grandma and I had built together, and that I was now expanding in ways even she might not have imagined. The acceptance speech I'd given tonight had focused on our newest initiative, a digitization project, to create accessible versions of rare literary works for visually impaired readers. The enthusiastic response had been overwhelming, with 3 universities already reaching out to discuss partnerships. As I finally slipped into bed, I realized how much had changed in the year since the will reading. The inheritance that Valerie and Noah had coveted so desperately had indeed been valuable, but not in the ways they'd understood. The true value wasn't in the property or the collection, but in the purpose they had given me. The flight home. The next day was delayed by storms, meaning I arrived back at the Montgomery estate well after midnight. The house was dark except for a single light in the library, Thomas's way of welcoming me home. He'd moved into the guest cottage on the property 6 months ago, taking on more responsibility for the educational programming while I focused on conservation work. I dropped my suitcase in the entryway and made my way to the kitchen, surprised to find a handwritten note from Thomas on the counter. "Urgent. Call Melanie as soon as you get in, no matter the hour. Left casserole in fridge. Proud of you, sis." Beside the note lay a newspaper clipping from the local paper. The headline made my blood run cold. "Former financial advisor escapes during prison transport." Noah had escaped custody. My hands trembling slightly, I dialed Melanie's number, not caring that it was nearly 1 in the morning. She answered on the second ring, sounding fully awake. "Rebecca, are you home?" Just walked in. I saw the headline. "It happened yesterday." "Morning," Melanie cut in. They were transferring him to testify in a related case. The transport van was involved in a minor accident, and in the confusion, he managed to slip away. They have no idea where he is. I sank into a kitchen chair. Do they think he'll try to leave the country? They're monitoring airports and border crossings, but... She hesitated. The U.S. Marshal assigned to the case thinks he might attempt to access hidden funds first. Funds they believe may be in safety deposit boxes or offshore accounts set up under aliases. What does that have to do with me? Melanie's voice turned grave. Before he escaped, Noah was heard telling his cellmate that the librarian had ruined his life and taken everything from him. The marshals are concerned you might be a target, either for revenge or because he believes you might have access to information about Grandma Eleanor's accounts that could lead him to hidden assets. A chill ran through me that had nothing to do with the late-night kitchen's temperature. That's ridiculous. If such accounts existed, they would have been discovered during the investigation. Nevertheless, they're assigning a protection detail to the property starting tomorrow morning. I've already briefed Thomas. The sense of violation was immediate and profound. The home that had finally begun to feel peaceful again was once more under threat. What about the studio? We have 3 school groups scheduled this week. The marshals suggest postponing public events until Noah is recaptured, but they said they can work with you if that's not possible. Their primary concern is your safety. After ending the call with Melanie, I made a quick check of the house's security, a system we'd upgraded considerably after the will-reading drama. Then, despite my exhaustion, I found myself drawn to the library. The familiar space, with its floor-to-ceiling bookshelves and comfortable reading chairs, had always been my sanctuary. I switched on the desk lamp and noticed something unexpected. Grandma's chess set was laid out on the small table by the window, a game apparently in progress. Thomas occasionally played against himself, but this placement seemed deliberate. The pieces arranged in a specific pattern that looked familiar. Moving closer, I recognized it immediately. This was the final position from the game Grandma had taught me when I was 12. A famous strategic puzzle where an apparently losing position could be turned into a win with a single counterintuitive move. She'd used it to teach me about looking beyond the obvious, about patience and strategic thinking. A small piece of paper sat beside the board with Thomas's handwriting. Remember the end game. It wasn't a random message or a casual reminder of a childhood lesson. It was a deliberate communication. Thomas was telling me something without saying it directly. A knock at the front door startled me out of my contemplation. Checking my watch, 1:40 a.m., I moved cautiously to the entryway. Through the sidelight window, I could see a uniformed police officer standing on the porch. "Ms. Montgomery?" he called through the door. "Sheriff's Department. We're conducting security checks on your property as requested by the U.S. Marshal Service." Something felt wrong. Melanie had said the protection detail wouldn't start until morning, and why would they send a single officer in the middle of the night? "Please leave your identification in the mailbox," I called back, remembering the security protocols Melanie had outlined. "I'll verify your credentials and then open the door." There was a pause. Then, "Ma'am, this is an emergency procedure. I need to check the property immediately." The chess game. Thomas's note. The timing was too coincidental. "I'll need to call and confirm the procedure," I replied, backing away from the door toward the library where my cell phone lay on the desk. The pounding on the door grew more insistent. "Ms. Montgomery, open this door now." I grabbed my phone and retreated further into the house, dialing 911 as I moved. When the emergency dispatcher answered, I quickly explained the situation. "Stay on the line," the dispatcher instructed. "Units are already in your area and will be there in under 3 minutes." Find a secure location if possible. The sound of breaking glass from the front of the house sent me running to Grandma's bedroom, the one room in the house with a door that could be securely locked from the inside, a feature from the Victorian era that we'd maintained during renovations. I locked the heavy oak door and wedged a chair under the handle for good measure, then moved to the bay window that overlooked the back garden. In the distance, I could see lights on in the guest cottage. Thomas was home. I texted him quickly. "Intruder, called 911, locked in Grandma's room." His response was immediate. "Police already here, stay put." Through the bedroom door, I could hear movement in the house. Deliberate, searching. Then a voice called out, one I hadn't heard in over a year but instantly recognized. "I know you're in here, Rebecca." Noah's voice had lost the polished, professional tone I remembered. It sounded rough, desperate. "We need to talk about what your grandmother took from me." I remained silent, watching out the window as police officers with flashlights began to surround the house, moving with tactical precision. Thomas stood at the perimeter, pointing out something to one of the officers. "She hid accounts," Noah continued, his voice closer now. "Offshore holdings that were rightfully mine. I managed her portfolio for years, built it from nothing. Then, you turned her against me." The doorknob rattled as he tried it. Then came a hard shove against the wood. The chair scraped slightly but held. "You think you're so clever, you and your grandmother with your books and your secrets. But I know how Eleanor Montgomery operated. She would have left a trail, documentation, access codes, and you found them." Another shove against the door. Harder this time. The chair legs squeaked against the hardwood floor. "I don't have what you're looking for," I called out, trying to keep him talking while watching the police position themselves around the house. "Everything was disclosed during the investigation." A harsh laugh came through the door. "Do you really think a woman who planned that elaborate trap wouldn't have had contingencies? Hidden assets? She was too smart to keep everything in accounts that could be traced back to her." The revelation hit me suddenly. Noah wasn't just desperate, he was delusional. He had convinced himself that Grandma had secret accounts, hidden wealth that would somehow salvage his ruined life. The truth, that she had simply been an intelligent woman who recognized his schemes, was too humiliating for him to accept. "There's nothing, Noah," I said firmly. "No secret accounts, no hidden wealth, just a grandmother who saw through your fraud and protected what was rightfully hers." A final, powerful impact hit the door. The chair toppled and the lock groaned but miraculously held. Then came a new sound, the commanding voice of law enforcement, the crash of the front door being breached, rapid footsteps throughout the Yatazia house. "Noah Sullivan, U.S. Marshals, on the ground now." What followed was a blur of shouted commands, a brief scuffle, and finally, the sound of handcuffs clicking shut. When a female officer eventually knocked on the bedroom door to tell me it was safe to come out, I found myself strangely calm. Perhaps the final gift of Grandma's chess lessons. Sometimes the best move isn't the most obvious one. Sometimes, safety comes from stillness rather than flight. In the library, a U.S. Marshal debriefed me on what had happened. Noah had indeed escaped during transport, using a medical emergency he had apparently planned for weeks. He had headed straight for our town, convinced that Grandma Eleanor had hidden offshore accounts worth millions and that I had found the access information. "We received a tip from your brother earlier today," the marshal explained. "He noticed suspicious activity around the property while you were away and alerted us. We were monitoring the situation but didn't expect Sullivan to make a move so quickly." Thomas joined us, still in his pajamas with a jacket hastily thrown over them. "I saw someone watching the house yesterday afternoon," he explained. "Didn't get a good look, but something felt off. That's why I left the chess set out, our old signal for, be careful, think strategically." I hugged him tightly, overwhelmed with gratitude for his presence and quick thinking. "Sullivan will be facing significant additional charges," the marshal continued. Escape, breaking and entering, attempted assault. He won't be eligible for any kind of release for decades. After the law enforcement officers had departed, taking Noah back into custody, Thomas and I sat in the library, too wired for sleep despite the late hour. He really believed Grandma had hidden millions, I said, still processing the night's events. After everything, all the evidence of his crimes, he still saw himself as the victim. Thomas nodded, rearranging the chess pieces that had been knocked askew during the commotion. Some people can never accept that they're the villains in the story. They have to rewrite the narrative to make themselves the hero, or at least the wronged party. I picked up the White Queen, examining its delicately carved features. Grandma knew people like that. That's why she was always so careful, so strategic. She understood that the most dangerous opponents are the ones who believe they're justified. As dawn began to lighten the library windows, casting long shadows across the chessboard and the bookshelves beyond, I felt a profound sense of closure. Noah's desperate attempt to rewrite history had failed, just as his initial schemes had. The legacy Grandma had fought so hard to protect remained intact, stronger now for having weathered yet another storm. And I remained its guardian, not just of the physical property and collections, but of the wisdom and foresight that had made their preservation possible. Chessmaster, strategist, loving grandmother, Eleanor Montgomery had been all these things and more. With each challenge overcome, I understood her lessons more deeply. The morning light touched the crystal award I'd brought back from New York, sending rainbow prisms dancing across the library walls, a fitting metaphor for how Grandma's singular vision had refracted into so many positive outcomes, even in the face of those who sought to claim it for themselves. 2 years later, and with that final signature, the Montgomery Literary Foundation is officially established, Melanie announced, sliding the thick stack of legal documents across her desk for my final review. Congratulations, Rebecca. You've just created something that will outlast all of us. I signed the last page with a mixture of pride and humility, feeling the weight of what we'd accomplished. What had begun as a small conservation studio in a converted carriage house had evolved into something far more significant. The Montgomery Literary Foundation would now oversee not only the conservation studio and educational programs, but also a scholarship fund for students pursuing careers in library science and literary preservation. Grandma would have loved the irony, Thomas remarked from his chair by the window. The estate Valerie and Noah schemed so desperately to control is now permanently protected from people like them. They can't touch it, even if they tried again. Which they won't, Melanie added. Noah's additional 20 years for escape and breaking and entering guarantees that. And Valerie seems to have found her calling selling dubious spiritual healing workshops in Sedona. I couldn't help but smile at the update. Our cousin had apparently rebranded herself as a spiritual guide for wounded souls, complete with an Instagram account full of desert sunsets and vague inspirational quotes. It seemed fitting somehow. She'd always been skilled at presenting a curated version of reality. The foundation structure ensures the property and collection will remain intact, regardless of what happens to any of us individually, Melanie continued, her practical tone bringing us back to business. The Board of Trustees will oversee major decisions, but as executive director, you'll maintain day-to-day control of operations and programming. The board we'd assembled represented exactly what Grandma would have wanted, a mix of literary scholars, conservation experts, and community leaders who understood the value of preservation, not just as an academic exercise, but as a living connection to our shared cultural heritage. After finishing at Melanie's office, Thomas and I drove back to the estate, where preparations were underway for tomorrow's event, the inaugural Montgomery Literary Festival. What had started as a simple open house idea had blossomed into a weekend-long celebration of literature and preservation, with workshops, readings, and demonstrations scheduled throughout the property. The tent company just finished setting, up in the East Garden, Thomas reported as we walked through the main house. The chairs for the keynote address will be delivered by 4. Oh, and Dr. Harrison called. He's arrived at his hotel and will join us for dinner tonight. I nodded, mentally checking items off my extensive to-do list. And the special collection pieces, all installed in the exhibition room with proper climate control and security. The Austen First Edition is getting a lot of attention on social media already. The Austen, a first edition of Pride and Prejudice on loan from a private collector in England, was indeed the centerpiece of our special exhibition on women authors of the 19th century. When the collector had agreed to loan it to our fledgling foundation, it had felt like a vote of confidence from the wider literary preservation community. As we reached the library, I found myself pausing at the chess set, still kept on the small table by the window. After Noah's break-in, I'd considered putting it away, not wanting the reminder of that frightening night. But eventually, I'd recognized it as something more meaningful, a symbol of Grandma's strategic thinking and foresight, qualities that had protected both her legacy and me. I still can't believe how much we've accomplished in 2 years, Thomas said, following my gaze to the chess set. From nearly losing everything to creating something even Grandma couldn't have fully envisioned. I think she did envision it, though, I replied. Maybe not the exact form, but she understood the potential. That's why she fought so hard to keep it intact, to keep it in the right hands. A knock at the front door interrupted our reflections. Thomas went to answer it, returning a moment later with a young woman who looked to be in her early 20s, clutching a worn book to her chest. Rebecca, this is Emily Chen. She's here about the community submissions for the local authors collection. Emily stepped forward tentatively. I'm sorry to arrive unannounced, Ms. Montgomery. I know the submission deadline was last week, but I only just found out about the project and... She held out the book. This was my grandmother's. She self-published it in the 1970s. Poems about immigrating to America and building a life here. There were only 50 copies printed, and I think we have one of the last. I took the slim volume carefully. The cover was faded but still showed the title, Paper Lanterns, above a simple woodcut illustration. The binding was coming loose, the pages yellowed with age. It's exactly the kind of work we're trying to preserve, I said, immediately recognizing its value not in monetary terms, but in its cultural and personal significance. Stories like your grandmother's are often lost because they don't come from major publishing houses or famous authors. Emily's expression lightened. So you'll consider it for the collection? We'll do more than consider it. We'll preserve it properly and include it in our digital archive project. And I'd love to hear more about your grandmother if you're willing to share. Personal context adds tremendous value to these kinds of works. After showing Emily around the conservation studio and arranging for her to return during the festival with more information about her grandmother, I found myself drawn to the turret room, the secret reading nook Grandma had shown me when I first came to live with her as a child. The space had been transformed in the past 2 years. Not through any major renovation, but through purpose. What had once been my private retreat was now a crucial part of our educational programming. Small groups of children visited the turret room during our school tours, learning about the history of books and the joy of reading in the same space where I had found solace after losing my parents. The window seat still held its hidden compartment, but now it contained copies of the books Grandma had first read to me there. The Secret Garden, Jane Eyre, Little Women, available for visiting children to discover. Each book contained a bookplate explaining its significance to the Montgomery family history, creating a tangible connection between past and present. As I settled into the window seat, watching the festival preparations continue in the gardens below, my phone chimed with a message from Melanie. Just received word from the Historical Commission. The Montgomery estate has been officially added to the National Register of Historic Places. Congratulations. Another layer of protection, another recognition of what Grandma had built and what we were continuing to build. I found myself smiling as I texted back my thanks. A soft knock on the turret room door pulled me from my thoughts. One of our new staff members, a recent library science graduate named Michael, stood in the doorway. "Sorry to interrupt your quiet time," he said, "but there's someone here you might want to meet. She says she's family, but her name wasn't on our contact list." My guard instantly rose. 2 years hadn't completely erased the wariness that came from Valerie and Noah's betrayal. Did she give a name? Grace Sullivan. She says she's Noah Sullivan's daughter from his first marriage. I wasn't sure if I should— "No, it's okay," I interrupted, surprised but curious. "I'll come down." In the library waited a woman around. My age, with Noah's coloring but none of his polished presentation. Her clothes were simple but neat, her manner hesitant rather than entitled. "Thank you for seeing me," she said, rising as I entered. "I wasn't sure you would, given everything." "I didn't know Noah had a daughter," I replied, gesturing for her to sit. "He worked very hard to keep us separate from his professional life." Grace explained. "My mother divorced him when I was 12, after she discovered financial irregularities in their joint accounts. I haven't had much contact with him since then, by my choice mostly." She reached into her bag and pulled out a manila envelope. "I found these while cleaning out my mother's attic after she passed away last month. They're documents from my father's early financial practice, including client lists and account information from about 20 years ago." My breath caught. "Are you saying— I think there may be other victims from before he ever met your family? People who never knew they were defrauded because the amounts were smaller or the methods more subtle." She pushed the envelope across the table. "I'm not sure if it's still relevant given his current prison sentence, but it felt wrong to destroy them without at least letting someone know." I studied her face, looking for any trace of Noah's manipulation or Valerie's calculation, but saw only sincere discomfort and perhaps a touch of shame. "Why bring these to me?" I asked finally. "Why not go directly to the authorities?" Grace looked down at her hands. "Because I owe your family an apology, even if it's not my place to give one. When I read about what happened, what my father did to your grandmother and to you, I was horrified, but not surprised. It was the same pattern, just on a larger scale." She hesitated, then continued. "And because I saw the work you're doing here with the conservation studio and the foundation, creating something positive out of a difficult situation, it inspired me. I thought maybe these documents could help bring closure to others my father hurt." After Grace left, promising to return for a proper tour during the festival weekend, I brought the envelope to Melanie's attention. She agreed to review the documents and forward any relevant information to the prosecutor handling Noah's case. That evening, as we hosted a small dinner for Dr. Harrison and the other visiting specialists who would present at the festival, I found myself sharing the story of Grace's visit. "Remarkable," Dr. Harrison commented. "The ripple effects of your grandmother's actions continue to spread. Her decision to document and expose your cousin's husband's schemes may now bring justice to victims from decades ago." "It's like a stone dropped in still water," added Dr. Winters, the rare book curator from the university library. "The impact extends far beyond the initial splash." Later, after our guests had departed and the house had quieted, I returned to the library, drawn again to the chess set by the window. In the soft lamplight, the pieces cast long shadows across the board, reminders of strategy and consequences, of moves and counter-moves that echoed long after the game appeared to be over. I picked up the White Queen, remembering how Grandma had emphasized its importance during our lessons. "The most powerful piece on the board," she'd told me, "not because it can attack from any direction, but because it can protect everything else while doing so." Thomas found me there, lost in thought. "Big day tomorrow," he said quietly. "You should get some rest." "I was just thinking about Grandma," I replied, "and how she would have loved seeing all these people gathering to celebrate books and stories." everything she valued continuing through new generations. "She'd be proud of you," Thomas said simply. "Of what you've built." "What we've built," I corrected him. "All of us together." Outside the window, the festival tents glowed softly in the garden, white canvas luminous against the darkening sky. Tomorrow they would be filled with visitors, with conversation and learning, and the shared appreciation of literature. The estate that had once been the focus of such greed and manipulation had transformed into something greater than its monetary value. A living center for preservation and education, exactly as Grandma would have wanted. As I finally headed upstairs to my bedroom, formerly Grandma's, I paused to straighten a framed photograph on the wall. Eleanor Montgomery in her 30s, standing proudly in front of the Victorian house shortly after she purchased it. Her expression was determined yet joyful, a woman who understood the value of what she was building. "We did it, Grandma," I whispered to the photograph. "We protected it, and now we're sharing it with the world, just as you always intended." 5 years later, the September morning light filtered through the stained glass panels of the library windows, casting kaleidoscope patterns across the antique desk where I sat reviewing applications for the upcoming year's Montgomery Literary Preservation Fellowship. What had begun as a modest scholarship program had evolved into a prestigious opportunity for emerging conservators and literary historians. A fully funded year working at the Montgomery Literary Foundation while developing their own preservation projects. A knock at the door interrupted my concentration. Michael, no longer the hesitant new employee but now our confident program director, entered with a tablet in hand. "The architectural team just sent over the final renderings for the education annex," he said, sliding the tablet in front of me. "They've incorporated all your suggested modifications to maintain the Victorian aesthetic while meeting modern accessibility requirements." I swiped through the images, nodding with satisfaction. The planned expansion, a purpose-built educational facility that would connect to the carriage house via a glass-enclosed walkway, represented our most ambitious project yet. When completed, next year, it would allow us to triple our educational programming capacity and provide dedicated space for community workshops. "They've done a beautiful job integrating the new structure with the existing architecture," I observed. Grandma would have approved of the attention to historical detail. "Speaking of historical detail," Michael said, "the appraisal team from Christie's has arrived to begin their evaluation of the Bronte collection." The Bronte collection, a remarkable set of first editions, letters, and ephemera related to the literary sisters, had been unexpectedly bequeathed to the foundation by a retired English professor who had followed our work. The collection's value, both monetary and literary, was significant enough to require professional appraisal for insurance and exhibition purposes. "I'll meet them in the exhibition room," I said, gathering my notes. "And remind me, what time is Dr. Chen arriving?" "Her train gets in at 2. Thomas is picking her up from the station." Michael hesitated, then added, "There's something else you should know. A reporter from the National Literary Review called again. They're doing a feature on literary preservation institutions and want to interview you about the Foundation's journey from private collection to public resource." I sighed softly. "Did you explain our policy about focusing on the work rather than the family drama?" I did, but she was quite insistent. Said the human element was crucial to the story, especially given how the Foundation began. 5 years after the will reading, the media still occasionally tried to revive the sensational aspects of the Foundation's origins. Most had respectfully accepted our preference to focus on the preservation work rather than Noah and Valerie's schemes, but some still hoped for new angles on the old scandal. "Tell her I'll discuss the Foundation's mission and growth, but the family matters are off limits," I decided. "And make sure Thomas sits in on the interview. He's better at redirecting those kinds of questions than I am." After Michael left, I paused at the chess set, still in its place by the window, though now occasionally used by visitors during our literary games program. The pieces had been recently polished, The board refinished, but they remained essentially unchanged, a tangible connection to Grandma Eleanor and her strategic mind. The foundation's growth over the past 5 years had exceeded even my most optimistic projections. From a single building with 2 staff members, we had expanded to a complex operation with 8 full-time employees, dozens of volunteers, and partnerships with universities and cultural institutions across the country. The initial $2 million estate value had grown as well through careful management, grants, and an endowment campaign, allowing us to expand both our preservation work and educational outreach. I made my way to the exhibition room, formerly the estate's formal dining room, now transformed with museum-quality display cases and climate control systems. The Christie's specialists were already examining the collection, handling each item with the reverence of true book lovers. "Ms. Montgomery," the lead appraiser greeted me. "This collection is even more significant than we anticipated. The marginalia in this first edition of Jane Eyre suggests it may have been a personal copy owned by Charlotte Brontë herself and gifted to a friend." The potential discovery sent a thrill through me, exactly the kind of literary detective work that had fascinated Grandma Eleanor. "We'll need to authenticate that, of course, but if it's true, it would be a major literary find," she confirmed, "and would significantly increase both the scholarly and monetary value of the collection." After discussing the authentication process and timeline, I left the appraisers to their meticulous work and headed to the Carriage House studio, where our conservation team was preparing for an afternoon workshop on paper preservation techniques. The studio had changed dramatically since its early days. What began as a single room with basic equipment had expanded to include specialized workstations for different types of conservation, a small laboratory for material testing, and a digital documentation center where rare works were carefully photographed and cataloged for our online archive. Grace Sullivan, Noah's daughter who had unexpectedly entered our lives 5 years ago, looked up from the historic newspaper she was carefully stabilizing. Now, our head of paper conservation, after completing her master's degree in preservation science, Grace had found her calling in the painstaking work of saving fragile documents. "How's the Chronicle coming along?" I asked, examining the 1890s newspaper spread carefully on her workspace. "The lignin degradation is extensive, but I'm making progress," she replied. "The text will be fully readable when I'm finished, and the digital scan should capture everything for the archive." Grace's journey from apologetic visitor to valued team member had been one of the unexpected blessings of the past 5 years. Her decision to train in conservation had initially surprised me, but her dedication and talent quickly proved she was exactly where she belonged. That she had found healing by preserving history while her father sat in prison for destroying lives seemed like poetic justice of the highest order. "The school group will be here in 30 minutes, she reminded me. "Fifth graders from Lincoln Elementary. They're particularly interested in the bookbinding demonstration." I nodded, making a mental note to prepare the child-friendly binding materials we used for such workshops. Introducing young people to book arts and conservation had become one of my personal passions. Watching their faces light up when they created their first hand-sewn signatures or successfully marbled paper was a joy that never diminished. My phone buzzed with a text from Thomas. "Train running late. We'll bring Dr. Chen directly to the reception at 3. Mayor confirmed attendance." The reception, an intimate gathering to celebrate the official announcement of our partnership with the State University's Library Science program, had been in planning for months. Dr. Emily Chen, the young woman who had once nervously brought her grandmother's self-published poetry collection to our first literary festival, was now returning as the newly appointed director of the university's preservation department. Our joint program would create a specialized track in community literary heritage preservation, with Montgomery Foundation serving as the primary practicum site. Life's circular patterns never cease to amaze me. As I made my way back to the main house to prepare for the school group, I passed the estate's wrought iron gates, now flanked by modest signs identifying the Montgomery Literary Foundation. A small tour bus waited in the circular drive, the excited voices of children drifting through its open windows. "Ms. Montgomery!" One of the children spotted me, pointing excitedly. "It's her! The book lady!" I smiled and waved, still amused by the nickname that had somehow spread through the local elementary schools. The book lady who lived in the big Victorian house and taught children how to make their own books and preserve family stories. There were worse legacies to have. The tour group disembarked under the watchful eye of their teacher and our education coordinator, Riley, who had developed our youth programs into a model that other institutions now sought to emulate. "We're so excited to be here," the teacher told me as the children lined up. "They've been working on their family history projects all month in preparation for this visit." "And we're thrilled to have them," I replied, genuinely meaning it. These visits, watching young minds connect with literature and history in tangible ways, were among my favorite foundation activities. As Riley led the group toward the carriage house for their first activity, my phone rang, Melanie's number flashing on the screen. "Rebecca, are you sitting down?" Her voice had that particular tone that immediately put me on alert. Not alarmed exactly, but definitely signaling something significant. "What's happened?" I asked, moving toward the privacy of the library. "I just got off the phone with the district attorney's office. It's about Noah." My heart skipped a beat. Has he escaped again? The memory of that terrifying night 7 years ago remained vivid, despite the time that had passed. "No, nothing like that. He's dying, Rebecca. Advanced pancreatic cancer. The prison medical system has given him 3 to 6 months. I sank into the nearest chair, unprepared for the complex emotions that surged through me. Noah Sullivan had been the villain in our family story, the man whose greed and manipulation had caused so much pain. Yet hearing of his impending death brought no satisfaction, only a hollow sort of sadness for all that had been lost. "There's more," Melanie continued. "He's requested compassionate release to enter hospice care. Part of his application includes a full confession of his financial crimes dating back over 20 years. The DA says it's incredibly detailed. Names, dates, amounts, methods. He's apparently been working on it for months, ever since his diagnosis." "Why?" I asked, genuinely puzzled. "After all this time, why confess now?" According to the prison chaplain who's been counseling him, it's about making amends before the end. The confession includes information that could help recover funds for some of his earliest victims, people who never knew they were defrauded. I thought of Grace, working diligently in the conservation studio, who had chosen to build something positive despite her father's legacy of destruction. Has anyone told Grace? Not yet. The DA contacted you first because... Melanie paused. "Noah has asked to see you. Just once, before he transfers to hospice care. You're under no obligation to agree, of course." The request struck me as both audacious and somehow inevitable. Noah Sullivan, who had once broken into my home seeking non-existent hidden accounts, now sought a different kind of entry, into a conversation I had never expected to have. "I need to think about it," I replied finally. "And I need to talk to Grace first. This affects her more directly than anyone." After ending the call with Melanie, I remained in the library, my gaze moving across the room that had witnessed so many pivotal moments in our family's story. The will reading, Noah's desperate search, countless conversations about the Foundation's future, all had unfolded within these book-lined walls. What would Grandma Eleanor have done, faced with this unexpected final chapter? The strategic chess player in her might have seen an opportunity for closure, for information that could help others. The protective grandmother might have advised caution, questioning Noah's motives even as he faced death. Outside the window, I could see the school children engaged in their first preservation activity, carefully learning how to handle aged paper without causing damage. Beyond them, the gardens bloomed with late summer flowers, and construction markers indicated where the new education annex would soon rise. Life continued to move forward, to grow and evolve, while the past remained present but no longer controlling. Perhaps that was the final lesson in Grandma's intricate strategy, that even the most painful chapters could become part of a larger, more meaningful narrative if viewed with the right perspective. I picked up my phone again, this time to text. Grace, can we talk after the school group leaves? Something important has come up regarding your father. The hospice facility was nothing like I had imagined. Instead of the clinical environment I'd expected, it was a peaceful, almost home-like setting. A converted Victorian mansion not unlike Grandma's, with gardens visible through large windows and comfortable furnishings that belied its serious purpose. Grace walked beside me, her face composed but tense. After our initial conversation about Noah's request, she had surprised me by asking to accompany me to this meeting. I haven't seen him in 15 years, she'd explained. Maybe it's time for my own closure, too. The hospice director met us at the entrance, her manner both professional and gentle. Mr. Sullivan is having a good day pain-wise, she informed us. But please remember he tires easily. I'd suggest keeping your visit under 30 minutes. She led us down a sunlit hallway to a private room overlooking a small garden. The man lying in the bed bore little resemblance to the Noah Sullivan I remembered, the confident financial advisor who had once commanded rooms with his presence, who had broken into my house with desperate determination. Cancer and incarceration had hollowed him, leaving behind a diminished figure with sunken eyes and skin that seemed too large for his frame. Rebecca, he acknowledged, his voice surprisingly steady despite his appearance. Thank you for coming. His gaze shifted to Grace, and for the first time, emotion flickered across his face. Grace, I didn't know you would be here too. Last-minute decision, she replied, her voice carefully neutral. An uncomfortable silence fell. What did one say to a dying man who had once tried to steal your inheritance, who had threatened you, who had defrauded countless others? Social. Scripts failed in the face of such complicated history. Noah broke the silence first. I imagine you're wondering why I asked to see you. The thought crossed my mind, I admitted. He gestured weakly toward a folder on the bedside table. My full confession is in there. Copies for both of you. The original has already gone to the authorities with my permission to use it however they need to help the people I harmed. Grace picked up the folder but didn't open it. Why now, Dad? After all these years of denying everything, why confess when you're... She couldn't bring herself to finish the sentence. Dying? He supplied. That tends to clarify one's thinking. A ghost of his old sardonic smile appeared briefly. The chaplain would call it redemption. My therapist calls it making amends. I just call it finally telling the truth before I can't anymore. He shifted in the bed, wincing slightly. I've had a lot of time to think in prison, about the choices I made, the people I hurt, about why I did what I did. And, I prompted, when he fell silent. And I realized something that should have been obvious. I was good at my job, Rebecca, legitimately good at financial management. If I had just done honest work, I could have been successful. Not wealthy beyond measure, perhaps, but comfortable and respected. Bitterness tinged his voice. Instead, I convinced myself I deserved more, that I was smarter than everyone else, that rules were for ordinary people. Grace placed the folder on her lap, running her fingers over its edges. You destroyed lives. Yes. The simple acknowledgement seemed to cost him physically. Yours included, though not in the way I damaged others. I abandoned you, choosing Valerie and my schemes over being a father. That may be my greatest regret. Where is Valerie now? I asked, curious despite myself. A humorless laugh escaped him. Gone. She visited once after my conviction, just long enough to tell me she was filing for divorce. Last I heard, she was calling herself a spiritual guide or some such nonsense in Arizona. Always reinventing herself, Valerie. He focused on me again, his gaze more intense. I need to tell you something about your grandmother. Something I never admitted to anyone. I tensed, unsure what revelation might be coming. I respected her, Noah said simply. Even as I was trying to manipulate her finances, I knew she was smarter than most of my clients. The way she questioned, investment strategies, how she researched before making decisions. She was formidable. He shifted again, discomfort evident. When you confronted me with evidence of my mismanagement 3 years before she died, I wasn't just angry about losing control of her accounts. I was embarrassed that she had seen through me when so many others hadn't. The admission surprised me. Is that why you targeted her so aggressively after that? Partly. Wounded pride is dangerous in someone who already lacks moral boundaries. His eyes closed briefly. But it became something else too, a challenge. A game of chess between worthy opponents. At least that's how I justified it to myself. It wasn't a game to her, I said firmly. She was protecting her legacy. I know that now. He opened his eyes again, meeting my gaze directly. The irony is, in trying to steal what she built, I ultimately helped make it stronger. If Valerie and I hadn't made our move on the estate, would you have transformed it into what it's become? The foundation, the educational programs, all of it? The question gave me pause. Would I have been content to simply live in the Victorian house, maintaining Grandma's collection but keeping it private? Or would I eventually have found my way to sharing it more widely? I'd like to think I would have, I answered honestly. But perhaps not as quickly or as extensively. Crisis has a way of clarifying purpose. Noah nodded slightly. Eleanor Montgomery's final victory, turning even her enemies' actions toward positive ends. A hint of reluctant admiration colored his words. Which brings me to why I really asked you here. He reached carefully under his pillow and withdrew an envelope, holding it out with a trembling hand. This belongs to your foundation. It won't make up for what I tried to take, but it might help build something new. Grace took the envelope since I hesitated, opening it to reveal a check for an amount that made her inhale sharply before passing it to me. $250,000. A fraction of what Noah had stolen from others over the years, but a significant sum, nonetheless. How? I began, confused by the source of such funds from a man who had been imprisoned for nearly a decade. My mother's estate, Noah explained, glancing at Grace. She never changed her will, despite everything. When she passed last year, I was still her primary beneficiary. The funds were held in trust because of my incarceration. He paused, gathering strength. I've directed everything to be divided. Half to a victim restitution fund and half to your foundation, specifically for educational programs. Grace's composed expression wavered. You're giving away your entire inheritance? What use do I have for it now? A shadow crossed his face. Besides, keeping it would just be one final act of selfishness. This way, it might do some good. The conversation continued for a few more minutes, his strength visibly waning until the hospice. Nurse gently suggested we conclude our visit. As we prepared to leave, Noah spoke once more. Rebecca, one last thing. In my confession, you'll find details about others who were involved in similar schemes, colleagues, collaborators. Some are still practicing. The authorities have the information, but you should be aware too. Protect what you've built. Always the chess player, thinking several moves ahead, but this time perhaps from the right side of the board. In the car afterward, Grace and I sat in silence for several minutes before she finally spoke. I don't know how to feel, she admitted. Part of me wants to dismiss it all as the desperate actions of a dying man seeking absolution. Another part wonders if people really can change, even at the end. I thought about Grandma's chess lessons, about how pieces could transform their functions under certain conditions, how a pawn that traversed the entire board could become something more powerful. I don't think it matters whether we forgive him, I said finally. What matters is that the truth is now available to those who need it, that some measure of restitution will be possible. The consequences of his actions remain, but perhaps some good can come from this final move. She nodded slowly. The Montgomery Foundation approach, finding value even in damaged things. Something like that, I agreed, starting the car. Now we have a partnership announcement reception to prepare for. Life continues. The reception celebrating our partnership with the university's library science program was a dignified affair, held in the main house's renovated Grand Salon. University officials, local dignitaries, foundation board members and staff mingled among displays, highlighting both institutions' preservation work. Dr. Emily Chen, confident in her role as department director despite her youth, joined me near the display of her grandmother's restored poetry collection, the very book she had nervously brought to our first literary festival 5 years earlier. From community submission to centerpiece exhibit, she noted with satisfaction. My grandmother would never have believed it. I think the most meaningful preservations are always personal, I replied. We save books and documents because of the human connections they represent, not just for their monetary value. The mayor approached, champagne glass in hand. Rebecca, the architectural renderings for the new education annex are impressive. What a remarkable evolution from a private home to a cultural institution. The evolution continues, I agreed. We've just received a significant donation that will allow us to expand our educational programming even further, particularly for underserved communities. I didn't mention the donation's source. Noah's contribution would be acknowledged in the Foundation's financial reports, but without fanfare or publicity. This wasn't about redemption narratives or dramatic gestures. It was simply about doing what was right with resources that could help others. As the reception continued, I found myself drifting toward the library, seeking a moment of quiet reflection. Thomas was already there, standing by the chess set as if he'd anticipated my retreat. How did it go? He asked quietly. We hadn't had a chance to speak privately since my return from the hospice. About as well as a meeting with a dying man who once tried to steal your inheritance could go, I replied, attempting levity but achieving only irony. And the donation? Are you going to accept it? I nodded slowly. With conditions. It will be used exclusively for the new community education initiatives, particularly the intergenerational storytelling project. Something constructive, something healing. Thomas picked up the white queen from the chess set, turning it thoughtfully in his hand. Grandma would approve, I think. She always said the best victories aren't about defeating an opponent, but about making the right move for the right reason. She also said that sometimes the game continues long after you think it's ended, I added, remembering one of her more cryptic chess lessons. Through the library windows, I could see the reception in full swing, could hear the murmur of conversations and occasional laughter. Beyond them, the first stars appeared in the darkening sky, twinkling above the Victorian house that had been at the center of so much conflict and, ultimately, so much creation. 5 years ago, when Noah had broken in searching for non-existent hidden accounts, I had felt that the house was under siege, its peace violated. Now, filled with people celebrating knowledge and preservation, it seemed to have found its true purpose, not as a private sanctuary, but as a shared resource, a bridge between past and future. The grandfather clock in the hall began to chime, the same clock that had witnessed Valerie's first threatening visit, the will reading, and countless moments since. Its steady rhythm had measured out the years of transformation, from inheritance dispute to thriving foundation. We should get back to our guests, Thomas suggested as the chimes faded. In a minute, I said, moving to Grandma's desk. My desk now, though I still thought of it as hers. From the drawer, I withdrew the journal of birthday letters she had left for me, the chronicle of our years together that had brought me such comfort in difficult times. I opened it to the final entry, the one written just weeks before her death, and read again the closing lines. The whole world is a garden. Your garden is just beginning to bloom, Rebecca. Tend it well, share its beauty, and know that I am profoundly proud of you and the legacy you will create. 5 years of growth had proven her right. The garden she'd entrusted to me had indeed bloomed, not just preserved but expanded, its beauty shared with an ever-widening circle. What had begun as a battle over a $1, $2 million estate had transformed into something whose value could no longer be measured in mere dollars. A living legacy that would continue long after all the original participants in the inheritance drama were gone. I closed the journal and returned it to its place, then turned to rejoin the reception. The past had shaped us, but it did not define us. The future beckoned, full of possibilities that even Grandma Eleanor, strategic thinker that she was, might never have imagined. As we left the library, Thomas paused at the chess set, moving one piece, the white queen advancing across the board to a position of both protection and possibility. "Your move," he said with a smile, gesturing toward the doorway where our guests awaited. I nodded, understanding both the gesture and its meaning. The game continued, but on my terms now, with new pieces and new possibilities, just as Grandma would have wanted. My move indeed, I agreed, stepping forward into the next chapter of our unfolding story. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.